11 p.m. Strange BMW in my driveway, my shower running upstairs, someone else's perfume in my foyer, and that's when I knew my HOA president had crossed the line. I'd just dragged my luggage up the circular driveway of my inherited colonial mansion 2 weeks early from my European business trip, expecting nothing more exciting than a hot shower and 12 hours of sleep. Instead, I found my house lit up like a Christmas display, music drifting from my living room, and the unmistakable sound of someone singing badly in my master bathroom. The smell hit me the moment I unlocked my front door, expensive floral perfume that had been haunting neighborhood board meetings for months. The same cloying scent that followed Veronica Whitfield around like a toxic cloud of entitlement. My HOA president wasn't just making my life hell with citations and fines anymore. She was literally living in my house, using my shower, and from the sound of things, making herself completely at home. What would you do if you found someone living in your house while you were away? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if your HOA has ever pulled anything this crazy. Let me back up and tell you how I got into this mess. My name is Marcus, I'm 47, and 6 months ago I inherited something I never expected, a 200 square foot colonial mansion in Millbrook Estates, one of those neighborhoods where the lawns are measured with rulers and the neighbors communicate through passive-aggressive notes. My Aunt Dolores lived in that house for 30 years. She was the kind of woman who baked snickerdoodles for new neighbors and kept detailed journals about everything, a habit that would become my secret weapon later. When she passed, she left me her pride and joy, a house worth $850,000, completely paid off. After my expensive divorce cleaned out my savings like a financial tornado, this inheritance felt like winning the lottery while getting struck by lightning. Painful, but ultimately lucky. The house smelled like lavender and old books when I first walked through it, mixed with that particular scent of quality hardwood that only comes from homes built to last. Every morning I'd wake up to the gentle ping of those old radiators warming up, a sound that reminded me I was finally home. But every paradise has its snake, and mine wore pearls, drove a BMW, and had the personality of a parking meter with delusions of grandeur. Veronica Whitfield, 52 years old, HOA president for 8 long years, real estate agent, and the kind of woman who pronounces community standards, like other people say, national security. She lived in a smaller townhouse on the edge of our development. Nice enough, but nothing like the sprawling colonials in the main section where my inheritance had landed me. And boy, did that seem to stick in her craw. The sharp click of her heels on my front walkway announced her first visit. I was unloading boxes when she appeared, clipboard clutched like a holy relic, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine titled Suburban Dictator Weekly. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, though her smile had all the warmth of a tax audit. "I'm here about your mailbox situation." Turns out my aunt's classic black mailbox, the one that had stood sentinel for 3 decades, violated the sacred forest green color palette mandated by the HOA. The texture of its weathered metal told stories of thousands of deliveries, but apparently, nostalgia doesn't trump neighborhood aesthetics. "The fine is $150 if you don't comply within 10 days, she announced, savoring each word like expensive wine. "But this mailbox has been here since before I was born," I protested. "Previous violations don't excuse current ones," she replied, handing me the citation with the satisfaction of someone who'd just cured cancer through paperwork. That was just the appetizer. Week 2 brought a citation for leaving my trash cans visible after 6 p.m. Never mind that pickup was at 5 a.m. and my work often kept me out late. The crunch of gravel under her tires became a sound I learned to dread, usually followed by the rustle of another citation being slipped under my door. Week 6, she complained about my teenage son Tyler's friends parking on the public street during his weekend visits. "It creates an unsightly cluster of vehicles," she explained, as if teenagers gathering was some sort of municipal emergency. Week 12 brought the masterpiece, a threatened fine for excessive commercial activity because my cybersecurity consulting business required occasional equipment deliveries. 3 boxes from Amazon apparently constituted running a warehouse. The pattern was clearer than my aunt's crystal chandelier. Longtime residents left their trash cans out overnight, painted their shutters whatever color they pleased, and hosted parties that shook windows. No citations. But Marcus, the divorced newcomer with the fancy inherited house? Every move was scrutinized like evidence in a murder trial. "She's territorial," my neighbor Beth whispered one morning as we retrieved our newspapers. Beth was 60-something, retired, with the warm demeanor of everyone's favorite aunt. New people threaten her little kingdom, especially when they inherit houses she can't afford. When I booked my 3-week European business trip, I only told Beth and Tyler. Somehow, Veronica found out. The evening before my departure, that familiar heel click announced her arrival. "You really shouldn't leave a house like this unattended," she said, her eyes already mapping my foyer like a general planning an invasion. "I could keep an eye on things." "Thanks, but I've got it handled," I replied. Her expression could have frozen hellfire. "We'll see about that." 3 weeks later, I returned home at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, 2 weeks earlier than planned. The London conference had wrapped up ahead of schedule, and I was looking forward to sleeping in my own bed. The smell of jet fuel still clung to my clothes as I dragged my suitcase up the familiar driveway, already planning a hot shower and 12 hours of sleep. That's when I saw it. A gleaming white BMW parked exactly where my car belonged. My house was lit up like a Vegas casino. Every window glowed, the porch lights blazed, and I could hear music drifting from what sounded like my living room. The crunch of autumn leaves under my feet seemed unnaturally loud as I approached my own front door, feeling like a stranger visiting someone else's life. I slipped around back, using muscle memory from childhood visits to find the spare key under the loose brick by the garden gate. Years of visiting Aunt Dolores had taught me that sometimes the back door was the smartest entrance. She used to say front doors were for show, back doors were for family. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Expensive perfume hung in the air like a toxic cloud, that same cloying floral scent that followed Veronica around board meetings. But underneath it was something else, the aroma of my own kitchen being used by someone else. Takeout containers covered my granite counters like evidence of a crime, and I could see dirty wine glasses in the sink. My wine glasses, filled with wine from my cellar. As I crept through my own house like a burglar, documenting everything with my phone, my cybersecurity training kicked in. Back in my consulting days, I'd helped divorce attorneys gather digital evidence, and the first rule was always the same. Document everything, assume nothing, and never let emotion override evidence. I photographed the unfamiliar clothes draped over my bedroom chair, the different shampoo bottles in my shower, the prescription medications on my bathroom counter, blood pressure pills made out to V. Whitfield. The sound of running water echoed from upstairs, along with what could generously be called singing. Someone was taking a shower in my master bathroom, and they sounded like they owned the place. I climbed my own stairs, each step creaking its familiar tune, until I reached the landing. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, steam escaping like evidence of violation. Through the frosted glass, I could see a silhouette that definitely wasn't mine. "Veronica!" I called out, my voice echoing off the marble tiles. The singing stopped like someone had pulled a plug. The water kept running. "Marcus?" Her voice cracked like thin ice. "You're not supposed to be back for 2 weeks. It's my house, Veronica. I can come back whenever I damn well please." She emerged 5 minutes later, wrapped in my bathrobe, the thick terry cloth one that still smelled faintly of my cologne. Her wet hair dripped onto my hardwood floors as she faced me in my own hallway, looking about as guilty as a cat caught in a fishbowl. "I can explain," she began, clutching the robe tighter. "There was a break-in scare in the neighborhood. I was protecting your property as a community service." I gestured toward the empty wine bottle on my nightstand, a $200 Bordeaux I'd been saving for a special occasion. "By drinking my vintage collection and sleeping in my bed?" Her face flushed red, but she doubled down harder than a Vegas gambler. "I have HOA emergency authority over vacant properties during security emergencies. It's completely legal. Show me the documentation." She marched to my home office. My home office. Like she owned the place, pulling out a folder I'd never seen before. Inside was an official-looking document titled Emergency Caretaker Agreement, dated the day after my departure, complete with what looked like my signature authorizing her temporary oversight. Here's where my background in digital forensics became useful. I'd spent years analyzing forged documents for corporate clients, and this signature had more red flags than a communist parade. The pen pressure was wrong, the letter spacing was off, and the M in Marcus had a flourish I'd never used in my life. "Interesting forgery," I said, pulling out my phone to record. "But document analysis is literally what I do for a living." That's when a toilet flushed in my guest bathroom, and my night went from weird to completely insane. Out walked Dave Kowalski in full police uniform. Not just any cop, but the married father of 3 who lived 2 streets over and coached Little League on weekends. The same Dave who'd always seemed like a decent guy at neighborhood barbecues. "Everything okay here, Veronica?" Dave asked, his hand resting casually on his service weapon like this was a routine domestic call. The pieces clicked together with the sound of a vault closing. This wasn't just trespassing, it was organized fraud with law enforcement backup. Veronica hadn't just been squatting in my house, she'd been running some kind of operation with police protection. "Dave," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you realize you're in my house without permission, right? Off duty but in uniform with a woman who's been living here illegally while I was out of the country?" Dave's confidence evaporated like morning dew. "She said you gave her permission to house sit." "Did I give you permission to be here?" Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. "Because this is all being recorded," I continued, holding up my phone. "And something tells me your department has strict policies about officers involving themselves in civil disputes, especially when fraud might be involved." Veronica's face had gone from red to the color of old mayonnaise. "You can't prove anything illegal happened here." I smiled for the first time since walking into this nightmare. "Actually, I can." The next morning I woke up in my own bed for the first time in 3 weeks, though woke up is generous, I'd barely slept. Every creak of the house made me wonder if Veronica had made copies of my keys. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. The second thing was start investigating exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. While waiting for the locks to be changed, I explored my violated home like a crime scene investigator. The garage told its own story. My tools had been used and put back in the wrong places, oil stains on the concrete where they'd parked a second car, and my workbench had been turned into what looked like a staging area for home improvement projects. Not my home improvements. My neighbor Beth knocked on the door around 10 a.m. carrying a casserole and wearing the expression of someone with serious gossip to share. "I was wondering when you'd find out," she said, settling into my kitchen chair like she was about to deliver a state secret. "Veronica told everyone you were subletting to her temporarily, said you needed the rental income after your divorce." The violation felt personal and financial all at once. She hadn't just stolen my space, she'd stolen my reputation and privacy. "She hosted a dinner party here last Thursday," Beth continued. 8 people, catered food, used your dining room like she was showing off her own place. I thought it was weird, but she had an answer for everything. That's when I discovered my security system had been professionally disabled. Not cut wires or amateur hour. Someone had bypassed the sensors with the kind of skill that costs serious money. I'd installed that system myself after my divorce, partly for security and partly because tinkering with electronics helped me process stress. Seeing it surgically dismantled felt like finding surgical scars you didn't remember getting. By noon, Veronica had fired her first retaliatory shot. An official HOA notice appeared on my door, summoning me to an emergency board meeting that evening. 24 hours notice, technically legal under our bylaws, though barely. The charges read like a prosecutor's fantasy: disturbing the peace, harassment of board members, and my personal favorite, threatening behavior toward community officials. The meeting was held in the community center, a beige rectangle that smelled like industrial carpet and broken dreams. 5 board members sat at a folding table that looked like it belonged at a church bake sale, not a judicial proceeding. Veronica presided from the center chair wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's car payments. The fix was in before I walked through the door. 3 board members were current clients of Veronica's real estate business, something I discovered during my post-confrontation research. The 4th was her cousin Janet, who had the critical thinking skills of a decorative gourd. Only elderly Gladys Pembroke seemed capable of independent thought, and she looked uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. "Marcus," Veronica began, her voice dripping with fake concern, "we've received disturbing reports about your behavior last night. Witnesses describe you as aggressive and threatening." Witnesses, plural. I looked around the room and counted exactly 0 people who'd been in my house during the confrontation. "I'd like to hear from these witnesses," I said. "Officer Kowalski has provided a detailed statement about your erratic behavior," she replied, sliding a paper across the table. Dave's report painted me as an unstable homeowner who'd burst into my own house and made threatening statements toward a community volunteer who was protecting the property during the owner's absence. The creative writing was impressive. He'd managed to make breaking and entering sound like community service. They gave me 3 minutes to defend myself against their kangaroo court. 3 minutes to explain why finding someone living in my house without permission had made me aggressive. I'd like to see the board minutes that authorize this emergency caretaker program, I said. Veronica shuffled papers like she was dealing cards. That's an administrative matter. I'd also like to see the HOA bylaw that grants you authority to occupy member properties. More paper shuffling. The board has broad emergency powers. Could you cite the specific bylaw number? The silence stretched longer than a budget meeting. Finally, Cousin Janet spoke up. We don't need to justify our authority to you. That's when I realized this wasn't about bylaws or authority. It was about power, pure and simple. My background in corporate consulting had taught me that most bullies rely on their victims being too intimidated or too ignorant to fight back. They bank on people not knowing their rights or not having the resources to defend them. The vote was 4-1 to fine me $10,500 for harassment of community officials. Gladys was the lone dissenter, bless her heart. They also imposed a $500 monthly monitoring fee until I demonstrated compliance with community standards, whatever that meant. As I left the meeting, Gladys caught up with me in the parking lot. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace, a smell that should have been comforting but felt ominous. She's done this before, Gladys whispered, glancing around like we were planning a prison break. The vacant house thing. Previous targets moved away rather than fight her. The elderly woman's words hit me like cold rain, but they also gave me something I hadn't had before. Confirmation that this was bigger than just me. The next Monday, I walked into the law office of Sarah Morgan, Esquire, carrying a banker's box full of evidence and a determination that probably registered on the Richter scale. Sarah specialized in property law and HOA abuse cases, something I'd learned exists in depressing abundance. Her office smelled like leather and confidence, with diplomas covering one wall like battle trophies. Let me guess, she said after I'd laid out my story. They're claiming emergency powers that don't exist in your actual bylaws. Sarah's first discovery made my blood pressure spike. The HOA's emergency caretaker authority was complete fiction. She'd spent 15 minutes with our community's governing documents and found exactly 0 references to emergency property oversight, temporary caretaking, or any authority that would let Veronica squat in my house. Her second discovery was even better. The board had never voted on such authority. No meeting minutes, no resolutions, no documentation of any kind. The power Veronica claimed was as real as unicorns, but apparently more profitable. The third discovery made me want to frame Sarah's law degree. Veronica had been collecting monitoring fees from other homeowners for 3 years, with absolutely no legal basis. She'd essentially been running a protection racket with clipboards and letterhead. While Sarah worked the legal angles, Veronica launched her counteroffensive with the subtlety of a hand grenade. Tuesday morning brought an anonymous tip to the city building inspector claiming my home office was unpermitted commercial space. The inspector showed up while I was at a client meeting, but my security cameras, freshly reinstalled and hidden better than CIA surveillance, caught everything. The man spent 20 minutes walking around my property with someone who clearly knew the layout intimately. Someone who pointed out exactly which windows belonged to my office and where the electrical connections were located. The inspector found nothing wrong, because there was nothing wrong to find. But as he left, he mentioned to my neighbor Beth that whoever called in the tip had intimate knowledge of my house's interior layout. Gee, I wonder who that could be. Wednesday delivered another anonymous complaint, this time claiming I was running a business from residential property in violation of city zoning laws. Same pattern. Someone with detailed knowledge of my work setup, someone who knew exactly what equipment I had and where I kept it. Thursday brought the social media assault. Nextdoor posts started appearing about the difficult new resident who was causing problems for longtime community members. The Whisper campaign painted me as everything from a tax evader to someone probably hiding assets from my divorce. My teenage son Tyler came home from school asking why neighbors were questioning him about my activities and whether I was in some kind of trouble. Friday was when Dave's police buddies started their intimidation tour. Suddenly, patrol cars began cruising my street with the frequency of pizza delivery on Super Bowl Sunday. They'd slow down in front of my house, sometimes stopping to check things that didn't need checking. The message was clear: we're watching you. But Saturday was when I struck back with the nuclear option of the digital age: recovered data. My background in cybersecurity had taught me that most people delete files the way they throw away newspapers. They think it's gone, but it's really just hidden. Veronica had been careful to avoid using my computer directly, but she'd underestimated cloud backup systems and automatic syncing. My home security footage told a story that would make Hollywood jealous. 10 days of Veronica entering and leaving my house like she owned it. Bringing guests, including what looked like potential real estate clients, for tours of my property. Using my pool, my kitchen, hosting what appeared to be small dinner parties in my dining room. The most damning footage showed her systematically photographing my home's interior, room by room, with professional lighting equipment. She wasn't just squatting, she was documenting my house for business purposes. But the digital smoking gun was even better. Hidden in my computer's temporary files were traces of failed login attempts and cached data from her phone when it connected to my Wi-Fi. She'd tried to access my personal files, my financial information, my client data. The attempts failed because of encryption, but the digital fingerprints were there like breadcrumbs leading back to her phone's MAC address. Sarah Morgan's response to this evidence was the most beautiful thing I'd heard since my son's first words. "We're going to destroy her in court." By Sunday, the neighbor network had shifted. Beth organized an informal coffee meeting in her backyard, ostensibly to discuss community concerns. 8 households showed up, and by the end of 2 hours we'd uncovered a pattern of harassment and intimidation that went back years. Mrs. Peterson from Maple Street had paid $800 in fraudulent landscaping compliance fees. The Johnsons had been pressured into using Veronica as their real estate agent when they'd considered selling. Even quiet Mr. Williams admitted he'd received citations for violations he was certain other neighbors committed without consequence. The coffee meeting ended with something I hadn't expected: solidarity. For the first time since inheriting my aunt's house, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone. But as we discovered Monday morning, Veronica wasn't finished with her bag of dirty tricks. Not by a long shot. Monday morning brought the kind of discovery that changes everything. Sarah Morgan called at 8 a.m. with the tone lawyers use when they've found the treasure map. "Marcus, we got the court order for HOA financial records. You need to see this immediately." I drove to her office still in my pajama shirt, clutching a travel mug of coffee like a lifeline. Sarah had spreadsheets covering her conference table like battle plans, and her expression mixed triumph with disgust. "Your friend Veronica has been busy," she said, pointing to highlighted rows of numbers. "We found $47,000 in payments to vendors that don't exist." The pattern was elegant in its simplicity: emergency roof repairs during storms that never happened, tree removal services for trees that were still standing, parking lot maintenance for a parking lot that hadn't been touched in years. Every invoice was professionally formatted, every amount just under the threshold that would require board approval. But here's where my cybersecurity background became invaluable. While Sarah analyzed the legal implications, I traced the digital money trail. Every fake vendor check had been deposited into accounts linked to Whitfield Property Solutions LLC, a company that existed only on paper and in Veronica's bank account. "She's been systematically robbing the entire community," I said, watching the numbers add up. "But there's something bigger here." That's when Sarah showed me the file that made everything click into place. Hidden in my home office papers, the ones Veronica had clearly rifled through, we found her business plan for Whitfield Premium Property Management. The document read like a criminal manifesto disguised as corporate strategy. Her plan explicitly outlined using temporarily vacant luxury homes as showcase properties for high-end real estate clients. She hadn't just been squatting in my house for convenience. She'd been running a sophisticated con game, using my inherited mansion as her personal showroom to impress wealthy buyers. The dinner parties, the professional photography, the touring potential clients through my home, it was all part of a scheme to present herself as managing luxury properties she couldn't afford. The email chain we discovered was even more damning. Correspondence between Veronica and something called Elite Estates Management showed they'd been splitting profits from unauthorized use of vacant homes across 3 different counties. My house wasn't her first rodeo, it was just her most ambitious target. But the nuclear revelation came when we found her backup plan. Buried in the files was a purchase agreement template, pre-filled with my property address and a sale price $200,000 below market value. She'd been preparing to claim financial authority over my house through some kind of emergency lien process, essentially stealing my inheritance through legal paperwork and administrative manipulation. My neighbor Beth's forensic accounting background, something she'd modestly failed to mention during our coffee meetings, proved invaluable. She'd spent her career tracking corporate fraud, and Veronica's schemes were textbook examples of embezzlement and property fraud. "The total theft across all communities is probably over $200,000, Beth explained that evening as we sat in my kitchen, documents spread across the table like evidence in a war crimes trial. She's been targeting vacant properties, elderly homeowners, and anyone too intimidated to fight back. The scope was breathtaking. 6 different HOA communities, dozens of victims, years of systematic fraud. My case wasn't just about someone squatting in my house, it was about dismantling a criminal enterprise that had been operating under the cover of community service. That night, as I sat in my reclaimed living room, the pieces of Veronica's operation became crystal clear. She wasn't just a petty tyrant drunk on HOA power. She was a professional con artist who'd figured out how to monetize homeowner intimidation. The violation of my home suddenly felt less personal and more strategic. I hadn't been randomly targeted. I'd been specifically chosen because my inherited house represented the perfect combination of high value and vulnerable ownership. A divorced man dealing with a recent inheritance, still learning the neighborhood dynamics, temporarily absent for business travel. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd targeted someone with the technical skills to trace her digital footprint, the financial resources to fight back legally, and the stubborn streak to see it through to the end. As I locked my newly secured front door that night, I realized the real battle was just beginning. We hadn't just discovered evidence of fraud, we'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond my violated sanctuary. And tomorrow, we were going to start taking it apart piece by piece. Tuesday morning turned my kitchen into a war room that would make Pentagon strategists jealous. Sarah Morgan arrived with legal briefs, Beth brought her forensic accounting arsenal, and I contributed enough coffee to fuel a small army. The smell of fresh brewed determination mixed with the scent of highlighter ink as we mapped out our multi-pronged assault on Veronica's criminal empire. Sarah laid out our legal strategy like a general planning D-Day. Civil lawsuit first, trespassing, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and defamation. Each charge carried specific penalties, but more importantly, civil discovery would force Veronica to produce documents she'd rather keep buried deeper than Jimmy Hoffa. "The FBI is interested," Sarah announced, sliding a business card across my granite countertop. "Financial Crimes Division wants to talk about the mail fraud angle. Every fake HOA notice she sent constitutes federal mail fraud, and that carries serious time." The State Real Estate Board was equally enthusiastic about investigating unlicensed property management and misuse of client information. Apparently, using other people's homes as your personal showroom violates about 17 different professional regulations. Beth's forensic accounting work had uncovered the smoking gun we needed, detailed financial records showing exactly how HOA funds had been diverted into Veronica's personal accounts. Years of fake invoices, phantom vendors, and emergency repairs that never happened. The paper trail led straight to her doorstep like a GPS for fraud detection. "Here's what most people don't understand about HOA law," Sarah explained, pointing to highlighted sections of our community bylaws. "Emergency powers must be explicitly granted in writing. Any fines over $100 require unanimous board votes, and board members must disclose financial conflicts of interest or face personal liability." That last part was crucial. Every fine Veronica had imposed without proper board approval was legally worthless. Every decision she'd made while hiding her real estate conflicts opened her to personal lawsuits, and every dollar she'd collected through fraudulent fees constituted theft, pure and simple. While Sarah handled the legal artillery, Beth and I organized the community mobilization campaign. We scheduled a homeowner rights information session at the local library, carefully framing it as educational rather than confrontational. The goal was to give neighbors the knowledge they needed to recognize and resist HOA abuse without making it look like a witch hunt. 23 homeowners showed up, drawn by word of mouth and genuine curiosity about their rights. What we discovered during that meeting was both heartbreaking and infuriating. 18 different families had been victimized in some way over the past 4 years. Mrs. Morgan from Oak Street had paid $2,200 in emergency landscaping fees for work that was never performed. The Rodriguez family had been cited 17 times for violations that identical actions by other neighbors somehow avoided. Even tough-as-nails contractor Bill Morrison admitted he'd paid fraudulent fines rather than fight them because he didn't have time for HOA politics. The pattern was clear as my aunt's crystal. Veronica systematically targeted anyone who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. New residents, elderly homeowners, single parents, people with language barriers, anyone who seemed vulnerable or distracted by life circumstances. By the end of that meeting, we had something more powerful than legal documents, a united community ready to demand accountability. The technical aspects of our evidence collection became my specialty. Every homeowner who'd been victimized received a simple documentation template: dates, amounts, witnesses, photographs, and copies of any correspondence. My cybersecurity background proved invaluable for organizing digital evidence and creating encrypted backups that even the NSA would approve of. We established a secure communication network using an encrypted group chat, partly for security and partly because it made everyone feel like they were part of a resistance movement, which, in a way, they were. The media strategy required delicate handling. I'd worked with investigative reporters during my corporate consulting days, and I knew the importance of giving them a complete story rather than piecemeal information. Local TV news loves stories about authority figures abusing power, especially when there's visual evidence and sympathetic victims. Sarah filed a motion to freeze Veronica's assets before she could hide or transfer the stolen money. The legal mechanism was complex, but the principle was simple. You can't profit from crime while the crime is being prosecuted. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything for potential documentary purposes. The story had all the elements that make people stop scrolling: corruption, abuse of power, regular people fighting back against injustice, and enough evidence to fill a small library. But the psychological warfare was perhaps our most effective tool. I began attending every board meeting with Sarah present, politely requesting detailed financial documentation for every decision. My calm, professional demeanor contrasted sharply with Veronica's increasing agitation. "Could you explain the bidding process for this vendor?" I'd ask. "Where are the receipts for this emergency repair? What documentation supports this fee structure?" Each question was perfectly reasonable and completely legal. Each question also made Veronica visibly uncomfortable, because each question had an answer she couldn't provide without admitting fraud. By Friday, we were ready to launch our coordinated offensive. Legal papers were filed, federal investigators were briefed, media contacts were primed, and the community was organized. Veronica had built her little empire on intimidation and ignorance. We were about to teach her that knowledge and solidarity make pretty effective weapons too. Veronica's response to our organized resistance was swift, desperate, and absolutely predictable. By the following Monday, she'd filed a restraining order against me claiming harassment, stalking, and threats. The petition read like a creative writing exercise, complete with allegations that I'd been driving by her house and intimidating her real estate clients with erratic behavior. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. The woman who'd been living in my house without permission was now claiming I was stalking her. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning in the county courthouse, a building that smelled like justice and floor wax. Veronica arrived with a budget lawyer who looked like he'd gotten his degree from a Cracker Jack box, while I showed up with Sarah Morgan and a banker's box full of evidence that could choke a horse. Judge Patricia Morrison had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd heard every sob story and legal excuse in the book. She listened to Veronica's tearful testimony about feeling threatened and unsafe with the patience of a saint and the skepticism of a seasoned jurist. "Mr. Reed has been deliberately intimidating me at board meetings," Veronica claimed, dabbing her eyes with tissues that appeared magically from her purse. "He follows me around the neighborhood, watches my house, and makes threatening comments about my business." Her performance was Academy Award worthy, complete with voice trembles and strategic pauses. If I hadn't known she was lying through her teeth, I might have felt sorry for her. Then Sarah stood up with our timeline and security footage. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Mr. Reed has never been within 500 feet of Ms. Whitfield's residence," Sarah said, presenting printed screenshots from multiple security cameras. "These timestamps correspond exactly with the dates she claims he was stalking her." The footage was devastating. While Veronica claimed I was lurking around her house on Tuesday evening, my security system showed me hosting Tyler's study group in my kitchen. When she alleged I'd confronted her at the grocery store on Saturday, credit card receipts placed me at a client meeting 50 miles away. But the nuclear option came when Sarah presented audio recordings from HOA board meetings. "Ms. Whitfield claims Mr. Reed has been threatening and aggressive," Sarah told the judge. "These recordings from public meetings tell a different story." The audio was damning in its politeness. Every question I'd asked was reasonable, every comment was professional, every interaction was civil to the point of being boring. Meanwhile, Veronica's voice on the recordings grew increasingly shrill and defensive as I'd asked for basic financial documentation. Judge Morrison's expression shifted from neutral to annoyed. Ms. Whitfield, do you have any evidence beyond your testimony to support these stalking allegations? Veronica's lawyer produced Dave's written statement backing up her claims about my aggressive behavior, but Sarah was ready for that too. Your Honor, Officer Kowalski was present in Mr. Reed's home without permission when this alleged aggressive behavior occurred. His statement fails to mention that he was there as Ms. Whitfield's guest, not in any official capacity. The judge denied the restraining order with the kind of judicial irritation usually reserved for frivolous lawsuits and parking ticket appeals. She also warned Veronica about filing false claims, which felt like an early Christmas present wrapped in legal precedent. But Veronica's desperation was just getting started. The next week brought a coordinated campaign of dirty tricks that would have impressed a political operative. Anonymous complaints to my business clients claimed I was under investigation for fraud and facing serious legal troubles. Fake online reviews appeared on my company's website alleging everything from incompetence to criminal behavior. Most disturbing was the attempt to drag Tyler into her web of lies. My son came home from school upset because someone had called the administration claiming he was being neglected and left alone during my business trips. The school counselor, who'd known Tyler for years, saw through the obvious fabrication, but the stress on my kid was real and infuriating. Then came the child services visit. A very serious social worker named Janet Rodriguez appeared at my door on a Wednesday evening, armed with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Someone had reported that I was frequently absent for business travel and leaving my teenage son unsupervised for extended periods. The complaint was so obviously false it bordered on comedy. Tyler was 17, honor roll student, varsity soccer player, and more responsible than most adults I knew. But I dutifully provided documentation of my parenting arrangements, emergency contacts, and Tyler's academic and extracurricular achievements. Ms. Rodriguez spent an hour touring our home, interviewing Tyler, and reviewing our family situation. Her final report not only dismissed the complaint, but commended our stable home environment and Tyler's exceptional maturity and academic performance. The false report backfired spectacularly, creating an official record of Veronica's harassment tactics while highlighting what good parents look like. Tyler, bless his heart, was more amused than upset by the whole thing. She really thinks she can intimidate us with fake complaints, he asked that evening as we ordered pizza and celebrated the clean child services report. Doesn't she realize we have actual evidence and she has, what, exactly? Smart kid. He'd inherited his aunt's practical wisdom along with her house. But while we were celebrating small victories, Veronica was preparing her most desperate gambit yet. And this time, she was going to bring down the entire neighborhood association with her. Veronica's final act of desperation unfolded like a disaster movie in slow motion. Faced with mounting legal pressure and a community that was finally seeing through her schemes, she decided to burn down the entire system rather than face the consequences of her actions. It started with a mysterious computer crash. "I'm so sorry," she announced at the emergency board meeting she'd called for Tuesday evening. "Our financial records have been completely lost. My computer crashed over the weekend, and unfortunately our backup system failed too." The timing was about as suspicious as a lottery winner buying tickets with next week's numbers. Just days before the court-ordered financial audit, every digital record of HOA transactions had mysteriously vanished into the electronic equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle. But Veronica had underestimated two things: my cybersecurity expertise and the fact that deleted doesn't actually mean deleted in the digital world. While she was performing her technological tragedy for the remaining board members, I was working with a data recovery specialist who owed me a favor from a previous corporate case. The beauty of modern computer systems is that they're terrible at actually erasing information. They just hide it and pretend it's gone. Within 48 hours, we'd recovered 87% of the lost financial records from her computer's hard drive, including browser history showing she'd researched how to permanently delete files and data destruction software the morning before her supposed crash. The recovered files revealed the full scope of her operation: email chains with fake vendors, detailed plans for property takeovers, and a spreadsheet tracking which homeowners were most likely to pay fraudulent fines without fighting back. She'd been running her scheme with the methodical precision of a corporate enterprise, but the smoking gun was an email draft she'd never sent, complaining to her accomplice about that cybersecurity guy who thinks he's so smart. The draft outlined plans to destroy all evidence and make sure nobody can prove anything happened. While we were recovering her digital trail, Veronica launched her Scorched Earth campaign within the community. She called a special board meeting to vote on emergency assessments totaling $15,000 per household to cover unexpected maintenance costs and legal expenses. The assessments would have bankrupted half the elderly residents and forced young families to choose between their mortgages and HOA compliance. Her pitch to the 3 remaining board members who still bought her act was masterful manipulation. Marcus Reed's vindictive lawsuit is costing our community thousands in legal fees. Every homeowner should pay equally for the damage his harassment has caused. She was essentially trying to make the entire neighborhood pay for her legal defense while positioning herself as the victim of my wealthy newcomer privilege. The meeting was set for Friday evening, with minimal notice and maximum pressure tactics, but our community network was ready. 43 homeowners showed up to that meeting, a record attendance that turned the community center into standing room only. The smell of tension mixed with Beth's homemade cookies, which she'd brought because confronting corruption works better on a full stomach. Elderly Gladys Pembroke, now fully awakened to Veronica's tactics, stood up with a voice that could have shattered crystal. I moved to remove Veronica Whitfield from the board for financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. The vote was swift and decisive, 4-1 to remove Veronica from her position, with only her cousin Janet casting the dissenting vote. Janet herself was voted off the board 10 minutes later for failing to exercise proper oversight of financial irregularities. But Veronica's humiliation wasn't complete. As she gathered her papers and prepared to storm out, FBI Special Agent Maria Santos walked through the community center doors with the kind of presence that makes guilty people confess their sins immediately. "Ms. Whitfield," Agent Santos said, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of mail fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal wire fraud statutes." The handcuffs clicked with the finality of justice served. As Veronica was led away, she made one last desperate attempt to maintain her victim narrative. "This is all because of him," she shouted, pointing at me. "He's destroyed our community with his lies and vindictive lawsuits." The 43 homeowners who'd gathered to witness her downfall remained silent as the FBI escorted her to their unmarked sedan. The only sound was the autumn wind rustling through the oak trees that had watched over our neighborhood for decades before Veronica's reign of terror began. Tyler, who'd been sitting quietly in the back row doing homework during the meeting, looked up from his calculus and said, "Well, that was dramatic." The understatement of the century, delivered with the dry humor he'd inherited from his great-aunt Dolores. In the parking lot afterward, neighbors lingered longer than usual, as if nobody wanted to end this moment of collective vindication. Beth organized an impromptu potluck for the following weekend to celebrate new beginnings, and for the first time in months, people were genuinely excited about community activities. But as satisfying as Veronica's arrest was, the real victory was what happened next. A neighborhood that had been divided by fear and intimidation came together to rebuild something better than what they'd lost. 3 weeks later, the Millbrook Estates controversy had grown beyond a neighborhood dispute into a full-blown municipal scandal. The city council called a special hearing on HOA reform legislation, and the packed auditorium felt like the scene of a political revolution conducted with Robert's Rules of Order and name tags. Every seat was filled with residents, reporters, city officials, and curious onlookers who'd followed the story through local news coverage. The smell of nervous anticipation mixed with the institutional coffee that flows through government buildings like bureaucratic lifeblood. I was scheduled to testify about the need for stronger HOA oversight laws, but Veronica had other plans. Despite being out on bail and facing federal charges, she'd convinced her new lawyer, a slick character who looked like he charged by the syllable, to let her make one final public relations offensive. Her strategy was classic narcissist playbook: position herself as the victim of a wealthy newcomer's vindictive harassment campaign. She took the podium first, wearing a navy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, and delivered a performance that deserved its own Netflix special. "I've dedicated 8 years of my life to serving this community," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I've volunteered countless hours, protected property values, and maintained the standards that make Millbrook Estates the desirable neighborhood it is today." The audience was initially quiet, some even appearing sympathetic to her plight. She'd always been skilled at manipulation, and this was her masterpiece performance. "Now I'm being targeted by a vindictive newcomer who couldn't accept reasonable community guidelines," she continued, building to her crescendo. Marcus Reed has used his wealth and connections to destroy my reputation, my business, and my life over simple misunderstandings about property management. Several people nodded along. Her victim narrative was compelling if you didn't know the facts, and she'd always been talented at making her fraud sound like community service. Then she made the mistake that destroyed everything. "I have never done anything illegal or unethical," she declared, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "Every action I took was to protect our community's interests and property values." That's when I stood up and asked the moderator for permission to present evidence. "Before we continue," I said, walking to the front of the room with my laptop and presentation remote, "I think everyone should see what Ms. Whitfield's property protection actually looked like." The first video clip appeared on the large screen behind the podium. Security footage of Veronica hosting a dinner party in my dining room, complete with catered food and what appeared to be potential real estate clients touring my house. The auditorium fell silent except for the audio from my security system, Veronica's voice bragging to her guests about managing this beautiful property and the exclusive nature of our community's luxury homes. The second clip showed her rifling through my personal papers in my home office, photographing documents with her phone. The third captured her coaching Dave on how to intimidate homeowners who asked too many questions about fees and violations. But the nuclear option was the recovered audio from her crashed computer, a phone conversation where she explicitly discussed using vacant homes as showcase properties for her real estate business, complete with her laughing about that divorced guy who thinks he's so smart. The audience reaction shifted from sympathy to outrage in real time, like watching a political rally change directions mid-speech. Murmurs of disbelief turned into angry whispers, then open expressions of disgust. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, advancing to the next slide showing financial records, "this is $89,000 in documented fraud across multiple HOA communities. Emergency repairs that never happened, vendors that don't exist, and fees collected for services never provided." Detective Lisa Warren, who'd been sitting quietly in the third row, stood up to address the crowd. "Ms. Whitfield is currently under federal indictment for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. The FBI investigation has identified victims across 6 different communities. Veronica's lawyer attempted damage control, but you can't unsee evidence or unhear recorded confessions." The crowd's mood had shifted from curious to hostile, and even her most loyal supporters looked like they'd been personally betrayed. City Councilman Robert Morgan took the microphone with the authority of someone who'd seen enough municipal scandals to last 3 lifetimes. "The legislation before us today will require quarterly financial audits for all HOA boards, mandatory disclosure of conflicts of interest, and criminal background checks for community management positions." The vote was unanimous, 7-0 to pass the most comprehensive HOA reform legislation in the county's history. But the moment that made everything worthwhile came when elderly Mrs. Peterson, who'd paid $800 in fraudulent fees she couldn't afford, stood up in the back row. "I want to thank Marcus Reed," she said, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium, "for having the courage to fight back when the rest of us were too scared or too tired to resist." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes and felt like absolution for every sleepless night I'd spent wondering if the fight was worth it. As we filed out of the auditorium, Tyler nudged me with his elbow. "Dad, I think Aunt Dolores would be proud." He was right. She would have loved seeing justice served with such thorough documentation. 6 months later, justice had been served with the precision of a Swiss watch and the satisfaction of a perfectly executed revenge plot. Veronica pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more victims and criminal associates. The federal judge sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay $127,000 in restitution to all identified victims. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Dave Kowalski received 6 months in county jail, lost his police pension, and was permanently barred from law enforcement. Watching a corrupt cop face consequences felt like finding a unicorn in your backyard, rare, magical, and absolutely satisfying. The civil lawsuit settled for an additional $45,000 in punitive damages, money that went directly into establishing what became known as the Millbrook Estates Good Neighbor Fund. The fund helps families facing temporary financial hardship with emergency home repairs, medical expenses, and other community support needs. Our new HOA board, which I somehow got elected to as treasurer despite my protests, implemented the kind of transparency that would make government accountants weep with joy. Monthly financial reports, open bidding for all contracts, and quarterly community meetings where actual neighbors discuss actual issues like civilized human beings. Property values in our neighborhood actually increased after Veronica's removal, partly due to improved management and partly because buyers love communities with transparent governance. Turns out people prefer HOAs that protect property values through competent management rather than fear-based intimidation. The personal healing surprised me most. My house, which had felt violated and foreign for months, slowly became home again. Tyler and I hosted our first annual backyard barbecue that fall, with over 60 neighbors attending. The sound of children playing on the swing set I'd installed exactly where Veronica used to park her unauthorized BMW felt like reclaiming sacred ground. But the ripple effects extended far beyond our neighborhood boundaries. Marcus's law, officially titled the Homeowner Protection and Transparency Act, became model legislation adopted by 3 other states within a year. The law requires financial transparency, mandates conflicts of interest disclosure, and establishes clear procedures for challenging HOA decisions. I found myself testifying before the state legislature about HOA reform, speaking at homeowner rights conferences, and consulting with other communities facing similar corruption. My cybersecurity business actually grew from the publicity, as potential clients were impressed by my methodical approach to fighting institutional fraud. The documentary When HOAs Go Rogue, One Man's Fight for Justice premiered at the local film festival and won the Audience Choice Award. Tyler was more excited about appearing in a documentary than about getting accepted to his first-choice college, which tells you everything you need to know about teenage priorities. But the community transformation was the real victory. Beth established annual community rights workshops where residents learn about property law, HOA governance, and how to recognize abuse of authority. We created a neighborhood newsletter that actually contains useful information instead of violation citations. The Homeowner Legal Defense Scholarship we established helps law students provide free legal assistance to families fighting HOA abuse. Last year, they helped 12 families recover over $30,000 in fraudulent fees and fines. 2 years after Veronica's arrest, our annual block party has become the neighborhood event people actually look forward to rather than endure. This year's party drew over 100 attendees, including several families who'd been victimized by Veronica's schemes in other communities. As I stood in my backyard watching neighbors who'd been strangers become genuine friends, listening to children laugh instead of adults whisper about intimidation tactics, I thought about what my Aunt Dolores always said. This house was meant to bring people together. She'd been right, just not in the way any of us expected. The smell of grilling burgers mixed with Beth's famous apple pie, while Tyler and his friends provided a soundtrack of teenage laughter from the volleyball net we'd set up near the garden. For the first time since inheriting this beautiful house, it felt like the sanctuary my aunt had always intended it to be. If your HOA has ever pulled something shady, drop your story in the comments below. You'd be amazed how common this kind of abuse is, and how often victims think they're powerless to fight back. Trust me, you have more rights than you realize, and sometimes the bullies are the ones who are actually powerless when faced with organized, informed resistance. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how we helped 3 more families beat corrupt HOAs this year. Next week, I'll tell you about the city council member who thought she could shut down a veteran's food truck with fake health violations until she discovered he'd been documenting everything for 6 months. Remember, documentation beats intimidation every single time.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.